Welcome to the second part of the video in which I go over my matches in the Vintage Showcase. This time we're going to comment over my top 8 matches. Magic Online, contrary to the paper events, play and draw is not determined by the seed that you had in the top 8 following the Swiss round, so it is random. I would say pretty high seed, but managed to win the die roll anyway, so good for me. Obviously, powder the first hand into a Bazaar hand. I don't know the archetype my opponent is on, but after the first Bazaar activation I end up with a Noxious Revival, Wasteland, so I have minor interaction Wasteland, Noxious Revival to counter my opponent's Wasteland, so a decent situation. Game 1, expecting to beat most opponents. And indeed, an opening like that, turn 1 Wasteland, is something that I am actively happy to see with my next survival. Oh, just a Mox Ruby. Could be anything, like it probably is not bad because, well, they're playing a Mox Ruby, obviously. Expecting maybe shops, maybe something like that. I choose not to dredge my draw step, obviously, as I have just put Bazaar on the top of my deck. Get a pretty dry dredge, not much has happened, but assuming I get to keep my Wasteland, I'm going to be absolutely fine. Really happy to see Ancient Tomb being played, as it's not a Wasteland, so it means that I get to keep my Bazaar. I play Thalia, which changes off my forces. I don't have any, so it doesn't affect me too much. Cabal Therapy is not something that I rely on against the white Eldrazi deck, which my opponent's deck turned out to be very much either way. As I have the Wasteland in my hand, I don't need to dredge the Darkmoon Salvage, so I can go full on dredging the highest number cards. Reality Smasher in theory could be a little bit scary, but with Creeping Chill it's really not a big deal to raise them. I attack with my Bloodghast as it's free, I'm gonna return it, so I know my opponent won't block for some reason. Same thing. I even get the choice of either using my Wasteland on the Ancient Tomb or I have the choice of using Wasteland on the Ancient Tomb or not. They can't really use the Ancient Tomb, but it effectively is gonna deal relevant damage to them, so they don't want to. So it's not a clear-cut decision as to whether I should keep it or save it. There is almost zero chance that they're gonna play main deck Tabernacle, for which I would need to keep my Wasteland. And the upside of keeping the Wasteland is that I can use it to pay for Cabal Therapy maybe, but there is also not really any obvious nor great cards to name that I would have on my mind, so I just decide to leave the Wasteland in play for now. In fact, for the most part, a white source would be much more valuable for them than this Ancient Tomb is. So that's another thing that I can save the Wasteland for. Unlikely to matter either way. So I'm very, very much ahead. Mid-combat, thinking after the attack, opponent concedes because mid-attack, thinking about their choice of attacking, my opponent concedes because they realize they can't win, so. Obviously, forces come in for ley lines, expecting ley lines. Wasteland comes in because I like them against those types of decks. It sometimes hit their mana and hinder them pretty relevantly, especially if you manage to hit their mana with Force of Vigor too, on top of hitting the ley line. Similarly to playing against shops like Cabal Therapy, can't even play it too often through Sphere effects, through Thalia, so not expecting to be able to, and then it's just not very good, even when you can cast it. Unmask on the draw is questionable, not sure if I should have it, currently at 63 cards, obviously have to cut down to 60. And I actually in the end decided not to have Wastelands in my deck. I think on the draw, Wastelands are probably slightly better than Unmasks, but not clear cut. It's like maybe somewhat close, somewhat debatable. I keep the 7-card hand. I have 2 forces, well, I have a force and a mask, so I have 2 pitch spells to cast to interact with my opponent, 2 bazaars to fight through a wasteland. No answer to Leyline, no hollow ones, so Leyline is my weakness, but with Dredge in Vintage you are always playing this kind of a juggling lottery game in a way, where you try to keep answers to what they're gonna keep. Their hate. They do open with Leyline, but still, Force Plus and Mask is gonna be quite relevant. I choose to force a Thalia because otherwise I can't cast the Mask. And I draw yet another Force of Will, which means that I actually probably won't be willing to cast a Mask, given that Force of Will is more tempo positive. I can in theory cast both, but there are multiple cards that I want to keep. I want to keep the second Bazaar in case of Wasteland, which is likely. I want to keep Shambling Shell as it's a green card for Force of Vigor, which I will need to draw to win at some point. In this situation I decide to pass. There is little upside of deploying the second Bazaar just yet, both like from the information standpoint and because I'm not sure if I want to use the first one to begin with on this turn, so I absolutely will not use 2 as I would lose too many cards. With my opponent going down to 1 card, I'm definitely countering this Reality Smasher, which is a fairly quick clock, and I choose not to Bazaar to be able to build my hand to actually keep more cards. So after drawing a Narcomoeba in my draw step, I use my Bazaar, I get lucky, I find my Force of Vigor, and I have a perfect amount of cards. I get to keep Force of Vigor, 2 Bazaars. I'm able to use Force of Vigor during my opponent's turn under Leyline, and I get to immediately activate the Bazaar. I play Thalia, which prompts me to cast a Vigor in response. I could have upkeeped the Force of Vigor, destroying their Mana Crypt, but I didn't really want to. The damage from Mana Crypt is not irrelevant, plus on top of that they could have drawn, you know, another hate piece that I would like to destroy, more than their mana. I feel like it matters a lot more. End of turn Bazaar activations into untap Bazaar activations. Put me in a pretty nice spot. I get an Narcomoeba, 2 Amalgams, more Dredges in my graveyard, notably Golgari Grave Troll is here to put a lot of cards in the graveyard on the next turn. More or less milling my entire deck on the next turn. At least like a huge portion of it. Seems like that's gonna provide my opponent with a situation that's pretty hard to recover from. And that was true. They just thought about a little bit and conceded. That means that I won my quarterfinals and I move on to the semifinals. And on to the semifinals. In the semifinals I actually get paired against Theo Francona, a player that I already played against in the Swiss portion of the tournament. They piloted Bug, the blue, black, green, let's say mid-range deck. I consider that to be a quite decent matchup for Dredge. As you see, I'm like checking for sure if that's the same person in the previous pairings. So I'm not too unhappy to face off against Bug. I know that my opponent is playing Wastelands, so I could lose to that game 1, but still that's not going to alter my mulligan decisions enough. I would never powder a Bazaar of that hand, as I think that's too much of a risk and like too little of a payoff. Not gonna throw away a Bazaar plus Force of Will opening hand. Opponent, knowing that I'm on Dredge, mulligans heavily, probably trying to find a Wasteland. They end up on 5 cards. And they're on the play, so expecting them to be able to deal with my first Bazaar. They lead on a Verdant Catacombs. Play my Bazaar and hit pretty unexciting hits, if we're going to be honest. Under Creeping Chill means that there are -2 chills in my deck. Still only Force of Will, no hollow ones, only small dredgers. Unsurprisingly, they do have the Wasteland. And they do have a follow-up play on turn 2, which is a ponder. At first they tapped their Underground Sea for a black mana. If my opponent would have played a Deathrite Shaman, I would have countered it with Force of Will, as if I'm going to try to win with manual dredges, that might be necessary, as the Dredge Shaman, albeit slow, it's quick enough to hinder manual dredge plan quite a bit. Ponder, it's a good card, you know, one can scope their draw, but I'm going to save Force of Will for something actually impactful. They chose not to shuffle, means that they were happy with what they have seen, and I choose to dredge, hoping to hit something. I got a pretty lucky dredge. Hit Stinkweed Imp, Price Amalgam, another Darkmoor Salvage. That means that I have 5 power in play already, so I get to put a pretty decent clock on my opponent. I get to dredge for a lot on the next turn, and I have an extra Darkmoor Salvage if I find more Bloodgusts. Here my opponent plays with Tarmogoyf. I am forcing that because it would be a pretty meaningful blocker for my creatures, and my plan is to deal damage quickly enough. Pick up the Stinkweed Imp. Get another pretty decent dredge. Bloodgust, Price Amalgam, Golgari, Grave Throw. With the other Darkmoor Salvage in my graveyard, I get to put even more power into play. And I think this game is actually quite illustrative of the reason as to why I chose to play Bloodgusts over the traditional Bridges from below. I think with Bridges in place of Bloodgusts, pretty obviously I would never win this game. But with Bloodgust, even though I got Wasteland immediately on my opponent's first occasion after my first activation of Bazaar, I got a chance to still deploy some power. I got pretty lucky with my few manual dredges, but not crazily, incredibly fortunate, I would say, just a little bit above average. And I'm putting a pretty threatening block on my opponent. Threatening enough that my opponent's actually using Assassin's Trophy on Price Amalgam, which can go typically not a great strategy. Have a throw. I was hoping to see an Arcomoeba. I don't, but I still get to hit my opponent for 7. Go to 4 and they're going to take pretty heavy damage. They deploy Leovold, which on this board is basically a free creature. They can't gain life with the Dredge Shaman. I still pick up Tumbling Shells, hoping to get Arcomoebas. Seems like, fortunately, I had a Bazaar on top of my deck, but, well, too bad. Okay, with the Leovold here, they don't have a great block. They have to trade the Dredge Shaman, and they go to 1 life, which means that their Leovold is gonna trade for a Price Amalgam on the next turn. It means that if I dredge any Creeping Chills, they're gonna be dead to that. It means that if I hit any Narcomoebas, or if I dredge over my last Darkmoor Salvage, all of those things are extremely threatening to my opponent. And I do get to deal with all of my threats. Apparently I have nothing on board, but everything is good against my opponent, and so is Narcomoeba. Narcomoeba brings back 2 Amalgams, means that there are 3 lethal threats killing my opponent. I even get to pitch the Golgari Grave Throw in the cleanup to assure a great dredge on the next turn, and my opponent concedes. Alright, so that was of course the easy part. That's always the case. The game 1 is the easy part. It's actually like, rather than being happy with winning game 1, it's that more so that you feel like it's a disaster if you manage to lose game 1, especially against a Ferish deck, as those tend to acknowledge Dredge's existence harder in their sideboards. After thinking a bit, I decide to cut the Cabal Therapies in the matchup, as like the same logic applies, right? The game is not going to be decided by them comboing off after I get to do dredge things. The game is going to be decided by whether they waste on my Bazaar and I die, or if they Lele me, die. Flip might similarly hit and miss, and I don't even know if they play Tabernacle. And even if they do, my version is specifically built to endure that, so once again I'm putting myself at an advantage. The regular Bridge from Below builds have more trouble cutting Wastelands and Strip Mines against other blue decks. Blue decks against blue decks in general. As you need both Sacrifice outlets for Bridge, and you need answers to Tabernacle because you have little ways to defeat it, just the Ichorites. So once again I am taking advantage of the fact that I don't need to concern myself with that. I see a pretty great hand, 7 cards, Force of Vigor, Noxious Revival, Price Amalgam, Force of Will, like only lacks a Stink with Imp instead of Bloodcast to really be a best imaginable hand. The Hollow One instead of Bloodcast. Like it's pretty great. Like I get both forces. I can answer Leyline, I can answer I can protect my Force of Will. And that's not all. On top of that, my opponent mulligans to a whooping 3 cards on the play, which is a position I do not envy, but sometimes it happens. The powerful 3-card keep is Drip Mine, Mox Emerald, a 0-1 Tarmogoyf. I think briefly about forcing it, but there is no point. It is a 0-1 creature so far. The clock is not gonna win against the Bazaar's clock, so I don't even think it's actually a consideration to also will that Tarmogoyf. I do need to keep my Noxious Survival to be able to put back Bazaar on the top of my deck again. Here I think it's a pretty easy decision. I should discard 2 Dredges and a Bloodgust. I can keep Force of Vigor and Force of Vigor to be able to cast a Force of Vigor, and I can keep Force of Will and Price Amalgam to be able to pitch Amalgam to Force. Also get to keep the second Force if I happen to draw a blue card if I were to draw a card once again. And I have the Noxious Survival to get the Bazaar back. I didn't cast a relevant spell, so I get to Dredge twice. This time, knowing that I actually won't be able to cast 2 Force of Wills ever because I will probably be dredging through the rest of the game, I get to discard the Amalgam, put the Bloodgust trigger still on the stack, and that way we reanimate the Amalgam immediately, and we have some nice power and toughness onto the battlefield. On my opponent's upkeep, I destroy my opponent's Mox Emerald. Not sure if that was actually a good play, might have not been. Doesn't matter much. I think to destroy it, so it was probably a mistake. Possible that there was some kind of a disaster scenario in which they would draw, let's say, a Wasteland. They'll be keeping another Mox and they would draw a Pithing Needle. That would be, for example, a pretty hard scenario. In theory. So a little bit of a spew. I got too happy from winning as hard as I was doing already. I basically got too excited. Should have played a little bit more conservative here. Pick up a Darkmoor Salvage, just because I have extra Bloodgust in my graveyard. I do not activate Bazaar to be able to both play the Darkmoor Salvage and to hold on my Force of Will. I played the Darkmoor Salvage pre-combat, so I get to attack with 3 Bloodgusts to get rid of 4 of my opponent's life points, making them go to 5, and then having lethal on board with a Force for their top deck. My opponent types GG in the chat, so I know that I won. I'm pretty happy about that. The Vintage Showcase Qualifier tournament, as I have mentioned in the previous video, has some nice stakes, and that means that I'll be moving on to the finals. The winner of the finals is an invitation to the Magic Online Champions Showcase. I think that's the proper name of the tournament, which is an 8-person tournament with a 70,000 USD dollars prize pool, which means that the EV of winning the single match versus losing it is quite different. The winner gets the invite, the loser gets, well, not nothing, they still get some Magic Online chests, etc. But the difference is pretty drastic, so pretty excited to compete in the finals, but I'm also a little bit scared. Especially given that Vintage is a format of maybe even slightly higher variance than the other formats. The swings are harder. And here they actually consider the game. After a somewhat of a long wait, as I think the other semi-final match, mine was done in like less than 20 minutes, the other one extended to 15 minutes or something. So after this quite of a long wait, I finally get to play in the finals. The other finalist is Fnoop. That's the online nickname of a British player, Pete Ward, who's actually like pretty reasonably known in the Vintage community as a pretty strong player. Has won many vintage challenges. In general, has pretty high win rates, and it's not going to be the easiest opponent to face off against. They're exchanging pleasantries in the chat. I get to be on the play. I don't know what archetype it is on. I see no Bazaar, so I mulligan. Mulligan to 6. Bazaar, Force on the play. 2 Chills, a little bit of a bummer, but I get to put one on the bottom. No Dredges so far, but hopefully I'll find one. I'm reasonably happy about the send. I see a small Dredger, I see another Bazaar to trigger my Bloodghasts. 2 Bloodghasts on the next turn, so overall pretty fortunate. Pretty good Bazaar activation, I would say. Mana creep typically means more combo-oriented decks. At first I think it might be PO, as PO is kinda known for playing PO, paradoxical outcome decks. Defense Grid is not a very common card in PO though. It's more commonly played in the black-based Storm decks as a way to bypass counter magic. Given that once Defense Grid resolves I can't cast my Force of Will anymore, of course, I'm forced to counter that. Just kinda waste, like doesn't do anything but like you're just supposed to counter that. It's unlikely that I will take blind draws, but if it ever happens so that I would like to, then just be spewing value. Mana Crypt Defense Grid is followed up by Underground Sea and no place. Everything points to a more Storm based deck. I think Storm is actually not the greatest matchup for me. My hand is good right now, kinda, although not particularly against Storm specifically. I can dredge a lot. I'm hoping to hit Cabal Therapies to get to interact with his hand a little bit, ideally 2, so that I would know what to name the first one, more so than that I would know what to name of the next ones. The previous ones, as I still would not be exactly sure what to name. But luck has it, I milled half of my deck and there's 0 Cabal Therapies in there, so I don't get to interact with it. Realistically, I would probably need 2, as even not assuming that we for sure know that Fnoop is on Storm, I'm not sure what is the first name. It probably would be Dark Ritual, the first one then, as it's a card that's played in multiple copies and that's a card that you could have been thinking about playing Thermal but decided against it. Then with the second therapy you would have a lot of information. As it is, Mox Spare, Black Lotus, he has no cards in hand so he knows he's safe. Cabal Ritual into a Bolas's Citadel. Seeing Cabal Ritual, we confirm that it is a Storm deck, for sure, but there's not much I can do about it. With Bolas's Citadel, he will likely be able to cast his entire deck this turn. I cross my fingers, hoping that he's gonna whiff, but preordain, pick card on top, cast another preordain, then after 2 preordens, I don't really have hope, as that is enough selection to hit the cards that he needs. I see Dark Petition can find the win condition, 10 years of agony, he needs just 1 more spell, potentially it's too beautiful. Yeah, that's the case. That is the case. He probably searched for 10 years of agony with Dark Petition, and I get to get drained by 22 damages. Losing exactly. Kind of a bummer. My sideboard against combo is not too extensive. I board in my deck traps as they can help me even when I'm on the draw. I'm boarding in unmasks as they can help me to interact. I am cutting Leyline as if even if Leyline is not blank against his archetype, it's much less than exciting. I don't think I want Wasteland, I don't think I want Strip Mine. The games are going to be typically condensed, they're not going to take many turns, so not as much benefit from destroying the lands. Noxious Survival is not as needed as there is no... as I don't expect Wastelands for sure from his deck. There's not gonna be much interaction out of the Storm deck because in general the Storm decks are strong against Dredge decks. They're just faster. A Waffle on the last cut. debating as to whether Bloodghast or Ichorid are a slower threat. I think Bloodghast is a slower threat, so I should cut it. Force of Vigor, the reason why I bring Force of Vigor is the fact that it can hit my opponent's mana, it can hit Bolas' Citadel, that has utility like that. I am feeling comfortable cutting Noxus Revival, which I typically like to keep as a pitch to Force of Vigor, because I don't expect him to have leylines, so I don't drastically need to cast a Force of Vigor to even start doing anything. I can even take a little bit longer to dredge a Shambling Shell to get there. I ended up cutting an Ichorid instead of a Bloodghast. I think that's a slight mistake. I think an Ichorid is better than a Bloodghast, but pretty close and hard to tell. Keep this 6. We have a Force of Vigor. We have a green card to pitch. I do a Force of Will. Fortunately, no blue card to pitch. I can interact with his mana, but that's just not overly likely to be important, but also better than nothing. So, cast a turn 1 Time Walk. I consider forcing the Mox Emerald, but I'm thinking it's just too little. There's too little stuff, too unlikely to actually matter, and keeping the Force of Vigor lets me have an out for Bolas' Citadel, Tinker, the Tinker Citadel, get to do stuff. He goes to return to Dark Ritual, that's not a good sign. I'm already clenching, and I see a Bolas' Citadel. I'm actually very happy that it's a Citadel. There's 3 cards left in hand. I get to Force of Vigor his Citadel after he casts his first spell. Unfortunately, he always gonna get that first cast if he has a spell on top. He also gets to play a land if he has a land on top. He hasn't played a land yet. How do we get to interact? And his top card is a Time Twister, which is awkward because that means that instead of having 3 cards, he's gonna refresh his entire hand. Also gonna refresh mine, hoping to draw into a new hand of 7 cards with some interaction. Oh, in fact I did draw interaction, but just a sole mental misstep. Misstep is not the worst, and drawing 3 hollow ones is pretty funny, as they're gonna present a pretty huge clock on the next turn and give me a pretty decent out of using Bazaar into finding Force of Will into giving the Price Amalgam and Force of Will to survive it and then kill him with the hollow ones. But as it is, he casts a Duress, I'm forced to use my mental misstep. I could not cast that, but then he like gets a knowledge of my hand, so it's slightly more worthwhile to use it, I think. There's an argument to be made that saving 2 life and 2 storm might actually matter. I'm not sure about this play, but it like only matters in a fairly specific scenario where he follows up with like a Mox Lotus Tendrils, which now would be lethal, but otherwise wouldn't, had I not cast a mental misstep. As it is, he casts a Mana Crypt into Soul Guide Lantern. Soul Guide is actually not that good against me, as the only thing I'm looking for is a Force of Will, and I'm looking to survive with the Amalgam. I use Bazaar, I find no Force of Will. Fortunately, I do everything that I can do in this situation. I deploy my 3 hollow ones. Briefly consider playing the Darkmoon Salvage, but I don't think it has a high chance to matter. It might matter if I draw Cabal Therapy, I guess. Maybe I should have actually played it. I think I probably should have played it. Pretty minor, but actually irrelevant. One has flip with Mana Crypt, and he has a Tinker, which means that he gets a Citadel in play. I failed to have a Force for this Tinker. Had I had a Force for this Tinker, I probably would have been able to do well this game. Unfortunately, I did not, and I can start feeling the match slowly drifting away. He does cycle the Soul Guide Lantern, which is like the last glimpse of hope, because I'm like, oh, maybe he cycles the Soul Guide Lantern, it's gonna be fine, but like he quickly follows it up with Mystical Tutor, Keep Priority, Ancestral Recall, so like those 3 cards. He has to put the best card from his deck on the top of his deck. Virtually dead, just waiting for Pete to perform all the requisite game action. Duress makes sure that the coast is clear. The card that he found was a Yawgmoth's Will. Turns out he also had a Blightsteel Colossus, so Tinker was doubly threatening, as I would have pretty huge trouble defeating Blightsteel Colossus. And I get Tendrils. Run the Tendrils, and this is exactly that. 10 Drills of Agony. As I take 20, I lose the finals. And Pete Ward, aka Noob, gets to qualify for the Magic Online Championship. So overall, I do consider this to be a pretty good run. I did lose against a strong player with a deck that I was not well equipped to battle against in the finals. It was not a deck that I expected to see in the tournament, so worked out very well for Pete, worked out pretty badly for me. Overall though, I'm pretty happy with the changes that I have introduced to the Dredge list that I have run into the tournament. All the changes that I have made to the list basically happened the night before the tournament, as I just like went deep into the tank and thought about things that I disliked about how the stock Dredge builds look like. I just decided to like finally not follow the herd and took the matters into my own hands, and I think I got rewarded that multiple times throughout the tournaments. We had some games where Noxus Revival shined and brought back my Bazaar of Baghdad after he got wastelanded, especially in game ones. We had some games where we played without Bazaar, but we were able to dredge into a Bloodgas and an Amalgam and something else and just like win with those scrappy beats. And we also had some games where I got even rewarded for the last minute sideboard slots that I have chosen to run, the Sickening Shows, the Unmasked, etc. Of course, it is sour to lose in the finals, but it was a pleasure to compete in this tournament. And on that note, I hope that you enjoyed the video, you enjoyed the review of the matches. Remember to like and subscribe and maybe write a comment. And thanks you everybody for watching, take care and have a nice day.